$200 billion in gaming transaction value happens on an annual basis. A big piece of that over the next 10 years, let's say 10%, could be stablecoin based. Because of the programmable nature of what we could do with stables, as we focus on a vertical and how we could utilize the treasury, we can pass back reward and we can turn the payment mechanism into a profit center for marketplaces and publishers.
That's Kirt McMaster, founder of Playtron, a company building a gaming operating system, transforming how gamers access games across multiple platforms. After Kirt founded Boost Mobile, Kirt is now creating Game Dollar, an M0-powered stablecoin designed specifically for gaming use cases. Unlike typical Web3 gaming, Playtron focuses on making games more accessible and rewarding rather than financializing users. They hope to bring hundreds of millions of stablecoin users mainstream through discounts, bundles, and in-game benefits through their unique partnership with SWI and M0. Here's our incredible conversation with Kirt from Playtron. Season 4 of Stable Minded is powered by M0, the stablecoin platform for builders. M0 recently crossed 230 million in native stablecoins minted, helping builders turn payments from a cost center into a core revenue center. This season, we dive into how companies like Cast, Playtron, Wormhole, and others fit into this dynamic ecosystem. With M extensions, builders can fully customize their stablecoin programs. And with their orchestration APIs, builders can scale minting and redemption freely. Tune into episode 1 of this season to meet Luca and Greg, co-founders of M0. Stable Minded is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Hey, Kirt, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going today?
All right.
Welcome to Stable Minded, a show all about stablecoin navigation. A lot of the people that listen to the show are trying to navigate this space, and we've been really excited for this discussion. It seems like Playtron and the team have been doing some big things lately, announcing some big partnerships, some product vision that is very, very involved with the world of stablecoins, with GameOS and all that good stuff. So maybe before we get too deep, give us an intro on yourself, your role at that company, and how you might explain it to someone who just might be hearing about it for the first time.
Yeah, sure. We started Playtron a couple of years ago, raised a seed round. We've raised about 11.2 million to date. It's a mix of traditional funds, strategic, and crypto funds. So Circle's actually an investor in us. Polychain, VanEck, a few others. We have guys like Samsung, the big video game publisher, Square Enix. So it's a diverse mix of folks. The background of myself and my other co-founders, two of the co-founders, myself and another guy by the name of John Lagerling, we've been longtime mobile operating system guys. John was one of the original folks that helped build Android at Google. I was a founder of a company in the US called Boost Mobile, which was a youth segmented mobile offering, which is now owned by Dish Network. It was initially funded by Nextel, became part of Sprint, and then was spun off to Dish when Sprint and T-Mobile merged. It's had 8 million customers and billions in revenue. It was a really good example of segmentation in the commoditized space, mobile carriers, right? Which we think there's a lot of parallels to stablecoins, right? You have these commoditized industries. We believe there will be opportunities to segment, and that's effectively what we're doing with what we'll talk about today, Game Dollar, which is part of Playtron's product platform. I started a company. I had another company called Cyanogen. We were an Android operating system. I had about 300 people on my operating system team between Seattle and Palo Alto. We were trying to compete against Android. We had about 50 million active installs around the world. We sold about 7 million devices. We had the largest open source community for Android in the world, 100,000 contributors, 10,000 active contributors. At one point in time, we were the second largest repository on GitHub. It was a pretty massive open source project. So I learned a lot about building an operating system and how to bring it to market. Cyanogen didn't work out. Unfortunately, we did not succeed. But through the lessons learned of attempting to compete against Google and build a new mobile operating system, learned a lot about what's going to be required to build a new operating system that can actually penetrate in the market. A couple of years ago, Valve came out with the Steam Deck, and I picked that up, and I had an epiphany very similar to the early days of Cyanogen when Cyanogen, you could flash your Android phone with the Cyanogen version of Android. And to me, that represented a way to deploy all kinds of new services on top of Android, right? We have our own OS. Yes, you can use your Android apps, etc., but we could build our own suite of services. What Valve has done with the Steam Deck is something very similar. They built their own Linux-based operating system called SteamOS, and they've effectively extracted the vast majority of PC gaming is Valve and Steam, right? I mean, they're close to 90% market share of PC games. You know, you have all these other players, but Valve and Steam own the majority of that. So SteamOS effectively lifts all of Steam outside of Windows.
Is this
and
the right Steam?
Yeah,
The one I'm
that's
sharing?
Steam. Exactly, that's Steam.
Cool. So they are the actual developers. I wouldn't say I'm a gaming expert necessarily, but these give us context on where these guys sit
Steam
now.
is massive, man. Steam is Valve is a private company, which is actually interesting. You know, Tether on a sort of per employee basis probably does more revenue than most other companies on earth as a private company, right? I'd say Valve is probably the second, right?
Wow.
They're probably no more than 600 employees, and they do billions of dollars in revenue. If they were publicly traded, they'd probably be worth $100 billion. It's an extraordinary company, and if you're outside of gaming, a lot of people are not aware of the power of Valve, but they're massive. And Steam is the PC gaming distribution platform, and with SteamOS, they've created their own operating system. It's not Windows-based, it's Linux-based, to enable you to play your games on their first device, the Steam Deck. There'll be a second Steam Deck, and they'll probably do console-like form factors, etc. in the future. But it's Steam only, right? It's SteamOS is Valve Steam only. When I saw that device, I'm like, okay, know how to build an operating system, a lot of experience with Linux OS, tried to open up Android. Hey, we can do something similar to what Valve is doing with Steam. We can open up the entire Windows gaming ecosystem and integrate multiple stores, not just Steam, but, you know, Epic Games Store, GOG, which is another game store, and others to come, right? So there's a lot of folks that distribute their games on PC. They go through either the big platforms or they have their own services as well. With Playtron, we can integrate all of that. So what we're building with GameOS is a new gaming operating system that powers a new generation of PCs. In other words, a PC without Windows. And you put Playtron on that device, you can run your gaming PC like it is a console, and you can play all your games from multiple service providers. Sign into Steam, there's your Steam library. Sign into Epic, there's your Epic library. Everything is browsable in a single user experience. It's very similar to a console, right? So it's more mass market friendly than a traditional PC gaming experience. You know, and if you look at this category gaming, not mobile gaming, you know, on aggregate, we're about $200 billion globally for gaming, like video gaming, mobile games, and console PC games, right? 100 billion of that is console PC. And the mix of users between console PC, somewhat even, you know, around 50 billion each. But there's a reason a lot of people buy PlayStations and Xboxes and Nintendo Switches, is because it's simple and easy. You pick it up, you play a game, right? And the mass market consumer wants that. And that's, you know, we can see that in mobile, right? I mean, in mobile, you don't go through the steps you would on a PC. You pick up your iPhone, you download an app, you play a game. So with Playtron, we're making it super easy. We're enabling handhelds. We have a number of devices coming over the next 12 to 18 months. We announced our first device with SWE. We were in Dubai last week at SWE Bay Camp showing the OX1 device running Playtron. It starts to ship in a few months. It's really awesome. AMD silicon, beautiful device, high-end device, can play most of your games. And it has the crypto rails built in, so your SWE wallet is native when you sign up with the Playtron. That's the prototype device. If you go to sweplay.com, you'll see the actual device that's shipping.
Looks like this is it. This is coming out.
Yeah, this is
a month.
It starts to ship in July. So we were showing
this first podcast
last
episode. We've really shown a lot of things on the screen, so we'll see how this works. I think it's great that we can use this as visual aid. So yeah, this is incredible. So you have SWE. Give me a high level of like all the strategic partners that need to come together here to make this work. I'm imagining there are some really key pieces to this puzzle. You have SWE, you have Playtron, you have M0.
So that when we talk about Game Dollar, there's a couple of partners. I mean, when we talk about the device with SWE, we have an OEM in Shenzhen that we work with to build the actual device. We spec the device ourselves. This device is running Playtron OS. So we also had, like, when you build a device in China, all the factories in China are set up to either put Android on a device or Windows on a device, right? So we had to build our own testing tools for the factory. So Playtron is set up now to ship devices at scale around the world, in multiple form factors. And the Sui Play OX1 is the first device that we're shipping native with Playtron out of the box, right? Like you
It's
can
awesome.
install Playtron on a Steam Deck, on an Asus ROG Ally, Lenovo Legion Go. Any of these PC gaming handhelds that are running Windows, you can put Playtron on those devices and make them, in theory, run a lot better and a lot more consumer-friendly experience. The OX1 is the first device that is launching natively with Playtron out of the box. There's going to be more of those devices coming later this year and into next year. But Sui has been an amazing partner. They're a small investor in us as well. And, ultimately, you need this is Sui's device. It runs Playtron OS. We have an OEM that manufactures it. We managed to pull this off in pretty much under 18 months, which, shipping a new OS, a new handheld gaming console in that time frame is pretty spectacular. When you consider the Switch 2 took about 7 years to get that thing to market, right? We pulled this device off in 18 months, and it'll be more powerful than the Switch 2. So we're excited about that. And again, crypto Rails built into this natively. You sign up with Playtron, it generates a Sui wallet. ZK login makes it super easy. Sign in with Gmail, whatever, boom, everything is there. So whether you're a traditional gamer or you like crypto games as well, whatever, everything is available to you, right? You can play all your Steam games, your Epic games. Sui has a bunch of crypto native games on their blockchain that will be running natively on Playtron, the wallet native. So it creates a frictionless experience specifically for the crypto pieces. Valve, Steam, they do not allow any kind of crypto integrations whatsoever. So the biggest gaming platform on PC effectively blocks all of that. Not only do we allow it, but we can do native integrations, and that's exactly what we're doing with Sui.
It's incredible. It seems like, the things that I think about that get me most excited when it comes to stablecoins is the built-in infrastructure that they unlock and allow for builders to utilize that equips them and puts them at the distribution table next to some of the biggest technology players in the world who have global distribution everywhere. Because these rails are global, they're on a shared network, there's enough infrastructure and liquidity and distribution. There are all these things that now exist technologically to do, I think, what you're doing, which is you're taking on a massive, massive industry and market here from, like, you are the emerging challenger in that space that is a huge space. Can you maybe just, given your experience with Boost and just the career that you've already pursued in that world, the learnings perhaps of all of what that experience has led to in this, right? I feel like it would be foolish for me to know that you went through such an incredible experience building that company, to not ask about it a little bit as we kick off.
The biggest thing that Boost taught me is that, and we're sort of seeing it now in stablecoins. Back in the day, so Boost was an MVNO, a mobile virtual network operator. You would essentially lease spectrum from a carrier like Verizon or AT&T, and they would have the infrastructure, and you would build your own brand and service and sell it and market it to a target segment, right? When MVNOs were big, there was Boost Mobile, there was Virgin Mobile, there was a few of them. There's a few agencies, there's a few companies that rose to create white label platforms to enable other brands, consumer brands, to create their own mobile offering, right? They would actually do a deal with Verizon for the spectrum. They would put everything in place. So if you were a brand and you had a customer like a Walmart, you could launch your own mobile offering. Disney launched an offering. ESPN launched an offering, right? I was one of the first guys in the world to do this. I remember having conversations with Disney back in the day, and they're like, what do you think of ESPN Mobile? I said, it's a stupid idea. You shouldn't do it. Disney actually ended up spending well over $150 million and burnt that down after before even 24 months, they ended up shutting it down, right? I think we're seeing in stablecoins something similar. I think the world thinks we're going to need 1 billion stablecoins. That's just not going to happen, period, right? I don't believe that at all. I think that you have incumbents, and the incumbents have already formed, the native incumbents, Circle and Tether. I think it's going to be really hard to compete against the native incumbents for generic products. I think there's going to be big verticalized opportunities, but you have to look at and from our point of view, we're going after consumer, right? So yes, financial service companies, et cetera, banks that have large treasuries, these guys are going to be able to do something. The question is, are they really going to be able to compete against Circle Tether? Maybe. I don't know. I think it's going to be challenging, but I think they can fight that out. I think on the consumer side, the opportunity is look at where there's big, dedicated marketplaces and enthused customer bases, right? And figure out how you can aggregate that. And when we looked at, as we look at gaming, Playtron is attempting to aggregate sort of all of gaming in a single beautiful user experience, and not just PC gaming, right? We'll eventually have all your mobile games there as well. So for the first time, you'll have all your mobile games that you love and all your PC and console games in a single place, right? On a single device. That's unheard of. So we're aggregating games, we're aggregating stores, we're aggregating publishers and developers in a single place. So if you look at that entire $200 billion in gaming transaction value that happens on an annual basis, which is growing, we believe that a big piece of that over the next 10 years, let's say 10%, a couple of $1 billion, could be stablecoin based. And because of the programmable nature of what we could do with stables, as we focus on a vertical and how we could utilize the treasury, we can pass back reward and we can turn the payment mechanism into a profit center for marketplaces and publishers, right? And they could decide to do with that, they could decide to use it for customer acquisition. They could decide to give discounts on their games, etc. Any, free microtransactions within a game. There's a bunch of different things they could do with that. That's sort of the lesson learned with Boost, is that there's going to be verticals that win. And with Boost Youth, and that market was very successful. And if you look at gaming, we think it's very similar. It's somebody that's very savvy with technology. They're usually early adopters, and it's in a passionate user base with multiple marketplaces that could take advantage of Game Dollar. So that is sort of the thinking behind Game Dollar. But the thing is, some might be thinking, well, if you're building a gaming operating system, where the hell did Game Dollar come from, right? The operating system, fundamentally, operating systems are the best distribution innovation that we've seen. Operating systems create trillion-dollar companies. Right? iOS isn't just the operating system. iOS is the App Store, which is massive. iOS is Apple Pay, which is massive, right? And when you look at Playtron and GameOS, we will eventually have a marketplace called Playtron Select, where publishers will be able to do direct deals with us. We'll be able to publish those games into the Playtron launcher. Ultimately, every game publisher that we work with or developer, they will use Game Dollar. You'll be able to buy that game with Game Dollar on Playtron. So like Apple Pay is to iOS, Game Dollar sort of is to Playtron. It becomes the economic component behind the game operating system. At the same time, any store that we integrate into Playtron, we want to externalize Game Dollar. So let's say we integrate Store X, they have a specific dedicated user base, etc. We're helping them capture and sell new customers. They in turn can use Game Dollar for their own marketplaces external to Playtron. And we would share the yield with them, and they would be able to use that yield, again, as a profit center, incentivize customers, etc. I think there's a lot of compelling use cases there. So fundamentally, the operating systems are platforms that you build key foundational pieces on top of. Marketplace and payments are two of those things. And Game Dollar to us is the payment platform component of GameOS that we will use internally, natively, as well as externally with third parties, right? At some point in time, hey, we would love a PlayStation or Xbox or some of these other large marketplaces or these new app stores that are rising around the world since Apple and Google's monopoly on mobile is being shattered around the world. We're seeing new app stores rise around the world, and a lot of people are focusing on different segments. Some of them are focusing on gaming. We would offer Game Dollar as a way for these folks to create not only a new kind of payment platform, but a new kind of a new way for them to profit in time and create new reward for their customers.
Can you speak a little bit about the approach that you have seen work or not work when it comes to, I think, doing what you're trying to do, which is deeply resonate with a specific audience, and how you attempt to go about that successfully, whether it's a mobile focused buyer that's young or a gamer who's really into, your ideal player for Playtron, or ideal gaming studio who wants to partner with you to launch something. I always think about that distribution or that focus. How are you planning to identify? It sounds like you've already identified them, but how do you plan to really go deep and resonate there? in that way?
So we'll have a lot more to announce around the product in the coming months, right? It's early for us. We just announced it with the partners. We have high level thinking around how this is going to work. All of the pieces are not yet finalized, so I can't talk in detail about some of that today. But what I will say is you have to know your customer, right, and who you're targeting. If Game Dollar is just nothing more than some kind of new money, then I don't think you're going to get folks excited about it, right? I think you really have to figure out how to create value for the partners, not only the marketplaces that could use it and or the publishers, but gamers, right? If they don't feel like they're capturing some kind of value from using Game Dollar, and it's helping them, just build their library or with microtransactions inside of a game, etc. I don't think there'll be a lot of value there, right? So I think from a brand point of view and a product marketing point of view, we really have to nail that customer psychographic. And, Game Dollar itself, it has to be fun. Like you have to be excited to use it to the extent that you feel like when you're using it, you're creating value and that value is being accrued in your gaming lifestyle with the games and library that you're building. With Boost, like it was that focused on the youth market. We sponsored a lot of surf, ski, skate competitions, things like NASCAR and stuff like that. So it was knowing that target customer, right? And on the mobile side, yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do with how you pay for your plan, etc. But I think with gaming, there's a lot of compelling use cases for integration of Game Dollar into different games. I think there's a lot of the larger games like Roblox, they can afford to have their own economy with things like Roblox. But the smaller, more indie games, it's really hard to operate an economy when you're just starting out. So if there's a way that Game Dollar it sort of aggregates value, and then you can plug that value into your own game and use that as sort of the fundamental currency for your game, I think that becomes interesting.
Can you talk a little bit about the decision-making framework that you went through as the leader of this company when you were thinking about enabling this stuff on chain using rails like stablecoins that we're talking about? Maybe just go dial the tape back. Like, tell us, when did this conviction start? What options were you really strategically thinking about to make this happen? I know you just have announced all this stuff the last couple of weeks with M0. Just take us back to more of those like early architectural questions.
Hey, listen, it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, I've been in crypto for a while. It's always interested to me. Like I'm a technologist and an early adopter, right? I love technology ever since I was a kid. And I always I always take the optimistic approach of how technology can benefit new products. I'm a consumer guy. I'm not a B2B SaaS guy. So I always think about consumer products. Ultimately, I'm thinking about products that I want to use, right? I mean, with Cyanogen, that's the operating system that I would use. When I saw SteamOS, it's like, I can't play Sifu because it's on the Epic Game Store. This is ridiculous. Like, I should be able to play all my games. So Playtron is the gaming OS that I would use, that I would love to have, right? When it comes to crypto, there's just a lot of nonsense. There's a lot of bullshit, unfortunately. And I think the thing that's crossed over is stablecoins. And it's just become obvious that stablecoins are the gateway to the mass market. But more than that, I think stablecoins are very profound, right? I moved to the US back prior to .com. So I've been doing this for a very long time. And we've seen multiple iterations of fintech over the last 20 to 25 years. But what is a true native, purebred internet dollar? It never really existed. You had all these various incarnations of financial services, but you never had a true native, purebred internet dollar. And fundamentally, that is stablecoins, right? They are the thing that represents a true internet dollar. And I think that's incredibly exciting. So it's just obvious when I looked at what we were building. Hey, the economic value of exchange inside of the $200 billion gaming market is effectively a dollar, a US dollar, or any other locally denominated currency. Stablecoins were the thing, in my opinion, that could not only capture a bunch of that value, but enable all of the more divine virtues of crypto, right, to sort of manifest in the mass market, right? The programmability, the composability, etc. And once the consumer has a wallet, you could do a lot of other things. You could generally slowly introduce them to other things, right? That crypto native people value, but general consumers and gamers tend to scorn or look at with a lot of skepticism, right? So
It's a crazy
stablecoins
moment.
are legitimate.
Yep.
Even on our own team, like our team is primarily engineering, and it's a lot of Linux engineers. Linux engineers and the open source community tends to absolutely hate crypto. And I get a lot of shit for this from some of the open source community, right? Like, Playtron is involved in crypto. They automatically think negative of you, right?
Why do you
Versus,
think?
well, it's obvious. They hate NFTs. They hate, all of the scams, etc. But when you push all of that away, at the foundation, there's very compelling technology that can help evolve consumer products, right? And help create better consumer experiences. That's ultimately what I'm after. And so it's like the noble pursuit of crypto follows the path of stablecoins, because it really is the first to achieve product market fit outside of crypto natives with the masses, right? And I think that's the gateway. So Game Dollar is our native economic currency within Playtron and GameOS that we hope to extend to other marketplaces, that we then expect to drive some of those other values that are really important within crypto: decentralization, programmability, composability, etc. We think as it relates to gaming, it's going to be very valuable. Web3 gaming has primarily been a lot of bullshit. Nothing is broken out to the mass market. There's been a significant amount of failures. It's still very, very small.
Can you talk
We're
a
not
little bit
interested.
about why that is the case? Because I agree, and
There's no games. There's no big games that are fun, right? The fact is, you build a great game that's fun, people want to play it. Crypto games have mostly focused on financialization of games versus fun.
like gambling or betting focused games.
Yeah, gambling, right? Gamers play games because they're fun, right? If the game's not fun, go to hell, right? We're not interested in the financialization of a product. Get another
Hence
run around on a wheel.
Playtron. Playtron is what the name of the business is, which is good. It's all about play. I love it.
It's
all
all
not
about
anything else.
It's all about games, man. Now, listen, this doesn't mean, and this does not mean that there are elements of crypto that can be used in massive games. We know some very large game developers that have not announced publicly yet. They're building their own blockchain, for games that you'll see in the next 2 years. Off the Grid, I think, has done a really good job. But as much as Off the Grid has done a really good job, comparatively to other Web3 games that have done a good job, but to other big live services games, they're still very small, right? Web3 games is like that.
Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to Sui in that regard? Just as you guys were thinking about the core infrastructure, it sounds like you have a pretty good relationship there.
The Sui team came out of Meta. The CEO, Evan, used to be at Apple. They're going after the mass market. They recognize that, hey, they have some games they funded on Sui that use their blockchain. Society Super B. These are good games. These are actually fun games, right? But they're 2 games, right? 2 games don't drive success, unless you have Zelda or Mario Kart, right? 2 emergent games are not going to drive success. Sui is not naive. They recognize that the real market opportunity is going after all of gaming, and that's behind OX1. And the reason it's called OX1, because at some point there will be an OX2, etc. Right? There's a product roadmap over time that will enable us to expand that franchise. The first one's already sold out, so it's exceeded expectations. So we're looking at new stuff to come in the future. But Sui, like us, has the same point of view on this market. We're going after the mass market. We're not going after crypto natives. Yes, crypto natives are very important to these existing platforms, that are building blockchains, et cetera. If any of this is going to be realized, it's going to be realized in the mass market. And stablecoins, again, are the one crypto product that have crossed over. It is indisputable, right? That product market fit is there, trillions in transaction volume. This opens up a really compelling opportunity. And I think that outside of the B2B finance side of things, when you look at consumer, the most compelling is gaming and gaming marketplaces, right? Because they're, 200 billion, growing to 300 billion over the next decade. Inherently to games, there are economies, right? So there's just a lot you could do as you can begin to spread that around. At the same time, we're, I think, in a very unique position because Playtron is integrating many different marketplaces and actors in a single user experience and a single operating system, right? So to have Game Dollar as a native currency with Playtron enables us to sort of set the stage for what this can look like as the North Star, and then hopefully start to transition this out towards to marketplaces, et cetera, so they can use them external to Playtron. But yes, so SWE has a very similar worldview as us. It's go after the mass market consumer, not just the crypto natives.
Yep. It seems like through that partnership, you both uniquely can focus on the core infrastructure or really utility or complementary what you bring to the table in order to make that really, really work. Like SWE doing their job well, Playtron doing their job well. In some ways, it's complementary but different. And so it makes sense that there'd be a strategic relationship in that way.
There's a lot of complements there. As we look at building our store and store infrastructure, there are other companies that have grown out of Miston Labs and SWE that we would use to be part of that. To be part of that store, right? Like Walrus, they're sort of building a decentralized AWS. So if we build a marketplace, some of the games could be hosted within that environment, right? A sort of a DPIN type environment. That becomes very interesting. So we're looking at a very broad, deep relationship with SWE across multiple products that we're bringing to market over the next 18 to 24 months.
That's awesome.
And the OX1 will effectively be the vessel for all of that. There will be constant updates and eventually new devices, right? That will take advantage of everything that we're building.
Can you talk just on the device? So this is one of the most interesting things about Playtron to me and your approach is that when you think about vertical integration up the product stack, you don't just stop at the software. You enter the hardware space and the production of that, and really owning both sides of that is pretty rare. I haven't seen that lately work, or just I think the moats around some of these hardware providers like the Apples or Samsungs of the world are so big to compete with Xbox or Microsoft on hardware. I just can imagine is an incredible feat of like just a huge uphill battle. How strategically important is that for you to own the hardware? Why did you make that decision? What are the challenges you've faced in doing that? I feel like that's its own beast.
So Playtron, we're not a hardware company. I mean, maybe we'll build devices at some point in time, right? The OX1 was not funded by us, funded that, right? So SWE funded the production of the hardware. That came out of their balance sheet. We built the OS. Now, we know the hardware OEMs, we know how to build these devices. We brought it all together and worked very closely with SWE, but they are the ones that funded the development of the hardware. It's not to say that we could, we may or may not launch a hardware in the future, but just back to your question. I mean, there are two dominant mobile operating systems, iOS and Android. There is effectively one dominant PC operating system, Windows, and then, Mac is in its own world. The biggest thing that I learned with CyanogenMod was that although we had a lot of cool features that Android didn't have, we still had dependencies on Google for the Google Play Store. And the store is the primary monetization vehicle. There's search and payments, obviously, but the store itself is one of the primary monetization vehicles of an operating system. If you look at both iOS and Android. And in today's world, unless you can provide very compelling reason for a consumer to switch to a new OS, they won't switch, right? I mean, Microsoft tried to build their own phone with Windows Phone, and they had an app store and had the same apps as Android and iOS. So consumers like, why do I need this? It doesn't really do anything different, right? And it's not doing anything better. And the switching costs are high. The switching costs are very high if you're in the Apple ecosystem. So Windows Phone failed. Playtron is very different. Like we're actually, there's this $100 billion category of gaming that's never been mobile. For the first time, we're seeing these very powerful PC handhelds that can run these games in a mobile environment. But Windows on these machines it's absolutely terrible. It's a really bad experience. Windows is a monolithic operating system, and it's not optimized for mobile devices in any way, shape, or form. Playtron is creating a console experience. So we're effectively abstracting the $100 billion PC console gaming ecosystem from Windows, which I'd argue is one of the most valuable digital entertainment ecosystems in the world. And we're building a new operating system around that and enabling new kinds of devices. So this is not something iOS or Android has. And it's not something that exists within the, in the Windows world. It's just very, very fragmented, so you have this one actor, Valve with SteamOS, that's sort of shown the way, looking at it from our point of view, aggregating multiple marketplaces. We come from mobile. Hey, maybe you'll see a 5G device in a couple of years on T-Mobile or Verizon, where you buy that device with a 5G plan. The device might be $800, but it doesn't matter because it's $12 a month with Verizon or Docomo, right? You just really changed the way the consumer buys that device. So instead of even thinking about buying a $450 Switch 2, hey, I can buy something that has a library that's bigger than Switch, games that are not even available on Switch 2 because it's, Switch 2 is launching with effectively obsolete hardware from day one. They're not even going to be able to run Grand Theft Auto 6 when that launches next year. So you'll have a device that's better than a Switch 2 that has a greater library, and it might be only $12 a month, right? That we believe can vastly expand the market. And your mobile games will be there as well. So you have your mobile games, your PC games, and console games. So that is that's a distribution innovation that we think is very powerful, and it is an entirely different ecosystem that has never gone mobile that we believe we can bring to mobile for the first time, that doesn't exist on iOS or Android devices, with an entirely new kind of product category that can go out to that channel. That's very compelling.
It's incredible. It reminds me a little bit of the rapid explosion of streaming in video and just the players that rose or fell in that world, and how the licensing and incentives and distribution worked out. Kind of reminds me of that. I don't know if you have any thoughts there, but I'd love to better understand the existing relationships on the commercial side with an Epic Games or someone like that. And if I'm a player of one of those games, what my options are. Like, am I playing Epic Games outside of Playtron, but I can do it within the Playtron store with this device, with GameOS, with Game Dollar, and I kind of can choose? Is that how you imagine that future world?
Well, just to touch on streaming for a minute, we plan to integrate existing game streaming services. We think there's a role for game streaming in the world, but it's not something that gamers en masse are asking for, right? We think it's a nice complement, and we think it's a nice way to merchandise a game. So, hey, in the Playtron launcher, you have your native games that run locally on the machine. If you have the right bandwidth connectivity at the time, we could show other games that you could dive into and play. And if you like it, maybe you could buy it later and then download it so you can run natively on your device. You could have it offline, etc. I think that game streaming is a really good complementary service to native, but the consumer market for gaming has shown that it's not going to be the main events. Video streaming is a very different business than buying a video game for $40 or $50, right? And because of the cost structure of some of these games in the industry in general, I don't think the unit economics work for streaming. And just like games are 50 to 140 hours, you don't they're not 30-minute to 1 hour segments, right? So you have a very different commitment to a game. Most consumers will only buy 4 or 5 games a year, right? So even if you have a game streaming service, that doesn't mean you're going to really play many, many more games, right? But we'll offer it as a service within Playtron in time, when we're talking to a number of partners there to integrate their services.
Just on this Game Dollar piece, if I'm a user, if I'm Epic Games, if I'm Playtron, I'd love to better understand how the issuance kind of is working, or the reward systems are working. If you have any thoughts there, where M0 fits into this, all that stuff is interesting.
Yeah, we have a lot of thoughts there, but there's a lot of the details around that we're working through right now, and we'll have more announcements in the next couple of months in regard to that. In regard to M0, though, again, amazing partners. I mean, Zhao was at Circle for about 8 years. He's really the lead product guy on USDC. That he was foundational to the creation of USDC. So, to some extent, they're our product partner and co-architect of Game Dollar, right? And we think that it's very powerful, not only to have them and what they're building to enable us to bring Game Dollar to market quicker, but just their intellectual horsepower around the creation of stablecoins and applying that to Game Dollar, right? We think that's going to be really impactful. But, maybe in a couple of months, as we get closer to launch, we should all have another chat and talk more about the product, the incentives, reward structures, the rollout, and some of the mechanics and all that. Yeah.
Would love that. We could do a live stream or something when it launches, just to talk about those things. That could be fun. Last question for you as we close here. Thank you so much, Kirt, for the time, and love what you're building. I think it's such an interesting application for stablecoins. I think a lot of people are only looking at stablecoins from a payments landscape, from an infrastructure B2B landscape. And I absolutely love the application here with what tokenized money can do within the world of commerce, not just in a I'm swiping your credit card context, but in a value transfer context. There's so much there. What would be the call or the invitation to other other builders, other founders, people who might be listening that are building in gaming or outside of gaming around how to think about stablecoins and maybe breaking some of the misconceptions? We'll end with that.
I think ultimately it's envision yourself as the customer and what would get you excited to use something like this, right? You have to think beyond treasury and yield and incentive and all that. Like, we don't think consumers are that excited about yield, right? Yeah, crypto natives, degens, they're excited about yield, moving around to different farms and things like that. The mass market is not excited about those kind of things. Now, large marketplaces that might be facilitating billions in transaction volume on an annual basis, if they can participate in treasury yield, all of a sudden the payment mechanism becomes a profit center for them and or a way to take that profit and use it to incentivize their customers. But I think, we need to figure out a way to make Game Dollar fun to the gamer as well. So, because ultimately they're going to be making that choice to use this, right? So discounts, cashback, there's a lot of different gaming. They sort of aggregate and sell bundles, right? There's a company called Humble Bundle. They'll aggregate 4 or 5 games on Steam and they'll sell them as a bundle, even cheaper than what Steam sells them at. And they've been very successful at that, right? I think there's ways that, we can do similar things with Game Dollar. Gamers are always excited about getting a bundle of games for $20 that might cost them $40, right? They like to build their library. So I think there's fun things that we can do for the customer. I think if you're in consumer and you're building for a consumer and you're not actually building for yourself, you should think about getting out of what you're building, right? Because I only build products that I personally want. And GameOS is something that I want, and I can envision how Game Dollar can become that sort of fun money that gets me excited to transact across all these gaming ecosystem that brings new value back to me. And then if other game publishers and developers can begin to use that within their own games for microtransactions, it becomes even more exciting, right?
Could you, last thing, I promise, one example just to make this tactical, just what is one example of something that the nature of Game Dollar being on chain, backed by U.S. treasuries, for example, as an infrastructure, what has that allowed you to do for your player, for your user base that a traditional method wouldn't have done? What does that practically mean for you?
Again, treasury and yield means, the payment mechanism is a profit center. So, if you use Game Dollar to buy a game on Playtron,
so for you, it's more so just the commercial realities of what it does in and of itself is worth it.
Well, this is just one example, right? But if we're aggregating storefronts, right now you can compare prices within Playtron. Like, this game is X on Epic Game Store, costs this much on Steam, and on Playtron, if you use Game Dollar to buy that game, the game might be $5 cheaper, right? So that in and of itself is interesting. Or if that publisher is using Game Dollar for their economy, maybe you can reward them with free skins, et cetera, that would normally cost something, right? Because you're using that yield as an incentive structure within that game. I think all of these things are very compelling. And I think there's a lot of other things that we're thinking about as well, but we'll talk about more of that when we're ready to announce the full product and what it is to the consumer in a few months.
Cool. Well, thanks for the time. This was really fun. Excited for our part 2 live stream whenever that comes.
Awesome, Drew. Hey, take care, man. Thanks.